Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness, and Donovon Jenson is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. And today we are talking about problem solving. It's kind of an important factor to get through life to some extent. So, Donovan, what are your initial thoughts when it comes to problem solving?
Yeah, so this is such a broad and vague sort of topic that I feel like there are all kinds of different directions we could go. But to tie it more tightly to our theme of happiness, right? I feel like being able to solve problems effectively or in a way that like doesn't cause you a lot of emotional turmoil is something that you essentially have to be able to do to have like a good life or like an optimal life, right? Like if every single problem that comes across your plate, you don't know what to do, you freak out, you have a meltdown, like you're not going to be happy a large percentage of the time, especially since, what we define as like a problem could really differ a lot at what like level you focus, right? Like I have a drink right now. It could be a problem to me that it's like not cold enough, right? So like depending on how much you focus down on certain things, you could really give yourself a bad time fast if you don't have good tools for problem solving. Curious what your initial thoughts are.
Well, I definitely think you brought up a good point about assessing whether how severe or not severe the problem is, or how important is it to you, which I guess is dependent on what you value and what you care about. But, I think it's an important part of life in general. And I think it's how we develop our brains to some extent. It is a very broad topic. So I'm kind of in a problem of figuring out where to go with this right now, essentially. Yeah. And I'm trying to think of like what types of things or how do I approach a problem? And like, what are some bigger problems I've had? Like, I guess some good examples is like actually more severe problems is like when there was water damage in the house. That's a big problem. And that was, pretty much out of my scope of experience and being able to deal with it. It's like whether it was a roof problem or a plumbing problem, it was more about delegating and finding the right person. It turned out to be a plumbing problem and the pipe burst. And so there's no way I'm dealing with that. So yeah, we had to find the right person to address it. And sometimes that's what it takes, is finding a more experienced person to help you out with the situation.
Yeah, I think that's a good sort of starting point for things that you can do. Because every problem is going to be different in most of the time, but you can sort of use a process or like sets of guidelines to sort of like start working through the problem. And when I think about somebody who's like not a good problem solver, right? Like they like the negative case of this or whatever. It's typically you think of somebody, or like I've been this way myself in the past, where like a problem comes up and you just sort of like shut down, or you like don't you like refuse to do anything, or just like, oh, somebody needs to fix this for me. Where like developing sort of that skill, there are like a number of things, one of which you mentioned, which was like get more help, get someone with expertise. I'd be curious if there are other sort of like tools or strategies that you think of, like when any problem comes up, right? Like that any generic level that you use to sort of like start working through the problem. Like how do us like, part of what you were saying is like how serious it is, maybe how you assess it, maybe how you like make sure you're making progress towards it. But like any of those tools that you think of or go to, I'd be curious about.
So yeah, I think it's like initially assess, is this a problem that I actually am capable of solving myself, or is it someone I have to like refer out to help me? But if it is within like the scope of my abilities, I'm trying to kind of think of what might be a problem within my own abilities. Oh, okay. Like when I was trying to, I feel like we use this example a lot, but it is a generic example of just trying to lose weight. That could be considered a problem. And that's within my control, essentially, of what I eat or what activities I take on. And so it's kind of like creating, it's not sufficient enough to be like, oh, well, I'm just going to eat healthier and exercise more. That's not like, that's a vague plan, but that's not very specific. So I think dialing into the specifics, like I'm going to work out 4 times a week and I'm going to stick to a certain like carbohydrate limit or calorie limit, or I'm going to increase my protein intake to X grams a day, kind of a thing. So something more specific can kind of help us dial in with where we're going with this problem.
Yeah, that kind of resonates with me in terms of like one of the tools that I think of is like when I have a problem, if I don't know the solution offhand, probably one of the first things I do is try to start thinking about how do I make, or I guess like what are my options and how do I make them practical?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because like a lot of times it's kind of like you said, like, oh, I want to lose weight, but like I need to like do something with my diet or something, like when it's vague in area like that, it's
Yeah.
hard to make any real progress or measure your progress.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the first thing is to first just like brainstorm potential options, right? And sometimes the solution is more straightforward than other times. Like, for example, like housing problems, like there's a pretty well like established solution to that kind of problem, which is like if you don't have the expertise yourself, you go and hire someone and then they're able to solve it. So like that's another thing that I do as I'm trying to figure out the options is like very, very few problems are 100% rare, unique, different, special.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes there are other cases you can kind of look at to like, like you were saying with like sort of the diet stuff, like what are other people doing? Like what are other ways that this problem has been solved for other people?
Yeah.
Then occasionally problems come up that it's really hard to do that kind of research or like it's just hard to find some of those pieces. And in those cases, I try to think more around like, what can I make progress against? Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it may not solve the problem immediately. Like, for example, like if it's like, I haven't felt motivated to work on a project in 2 years. Like, okay, well, the solution to that may not be at hand. And the way that other people have solved it, right? I'm sure the way people have solved it being unmotivated is like extremely broad and diverse.
Mm-hmm.
But you can get sort of like a starting point or start making some ground by seeing like, well, what have people tried in that realm? Like,
Right.
okay, maybe I will try going to like this seminar or try organizing my stuff this way or whatever else. But I think, people who are like not good problem solvers,
Mm-hmm.
the thing that they run into is they sort of go like, oh, I don't know for sure which of these is going to solve the problem. I'm just
Yeah.
going to give up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's being willing to try different approaches until you find the thing that works. Because it's like what you read on the internet or Google to solve your problem might not be a sufficient enough plan. Like, for example, I got a flat tire probably at some point. Actually, I got 2 flat tires last year and had to change it myself. And, usually something like that, it's like, okay, go to YouTube. Even though I've done it before, it's been several years. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna YouTube reference how to do this again. But I got stuck at a problem with like I couldn't get the freaking lug nuts off because they were so screwed on so tight by whoever like changed my tires the last time, or when I got new tires the last time, however many years ago that was. So I was just stuck at that like step of like not even being able, like I jacked up my car, I can't get the tire off for the life of me. And so it was just like, okay, well, that doesn't stop me from continuing to, maybe I'm going to have to find someone stronger than me, or I had to like continue to scour Google and YouTube to figure out like, what do people do in this problem? Now it's a different problem of the other problem. And so I found the solution of, usually if you can find a long metal pipe, which I didn't have, so I had to go to Lowe's, grab a really long pipe, gives you more leverage, so you can get more leverage. And that worked, did the trick. And I felt so proud of myself, even though I don't know if I would have figured it out without YouTube. It felt good to be able to, consult my resources to get to the solution. And it's not always straightforward as like the first solution you come across.
Yeah, as you were talking about that, I had sort of a question or a connection pop up in my mind, which is like, part of solving problems is this logical piece in terms of like, what do you actually have to do to solve the problem?
Right.
And I feel like there's also, from what I've experienced or seen in other people, like an emotional piece of how do you manage like the emotional difficulty of working through a problem, right?
Yeah.
Because I could see a situation where someone else would have gotten as far as you to the point where they're trying to get the lug nuts off and they can't and they don't have the strength. And
Yeah.
that's where they would just be like, whatever, I guess I can't do it. Like,
Right.
I give up. So I'd be curious what your thoughts are on sort of like, one, like where you feel like you were able to like develop sort of that ability to just like keep pressing through. And then two, just bigger, like how you feel about the connection between the two.
I think one of the things that motivated me to press on in that moment was, thankfully, I don't think I think I would have been more frustrated. I definitely think I was frustrated in that moment because I was like, I'm stuck at this step. I don't know how to like move past this step. And, I might have been like, F it. I don't deal with this. I'll let someone else deal with it when they get home. And honestly, my mom came by and was like, oh, just wait for a man to come help you do this. I was like, no, no man is not going to be like, these are really strong. I work out a lot. I'm pretty strong. If I can't get these lug nuts, I don't think anyone can. And so I was kind of like motivated by like, oh, I don't need a man to change my tire. I can do it myself. And that's like what propelled me to keep researching and figuring out there's got to be another way to get these off without like I either need like one of those drill tools, or I need which I was considering, like, asking like a tire changing place to be like, can you come to my house if I pay you to do it? But I was like, oh, I found this very simple solution. So it's like, one, do you have a motivating factor? Like, how important is this problem? If I had to be somewhere, I would be like probably more flustered and more frazzled and stressed. Then I would probably be like, no, I can't wait for anyone to do it. It's gotta go. Like, I gotta get somewhere, so I gotta go. But in this situation, that wasn't necessarily the case. I could have, like, I didn't have to go anywhere during the rest of the day, but I was just kind of determined for other reasons. So I guess it's like, how do I regulate my emotions during these times where I'm like stuck or frustrated? And I guess it's kind of like breathe, but also think like, okay, this isn't like an impossible situation, but it's just like I haven't found the right solution yet. And so I'm just going to keep looking. So that kind of kept me grounded enough to continue to try.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like there's sort of a piece around it's just like general emotion regulation, right? Like not getting so locked in on either anxiety or stress or whatever it is that you end up not being able to think straight. I've also done this. I'm curious if you've had this experience before. There have been times that I can't or don't have time to get my emotions to the place that I would like them to be in. And I try to make my decision with the understanding that I'm feeling X, like whatever kind of thing, right? Like, okay, I'm really frustrated right now. I got to think of solutions right now because I don't have time to like calm down. As I like brainstorm some of these options, I'm going to think about like, okay, maybe I want to do this, but I'm really frustrated right now. So like, would not frustrated me make this same decision? And obviously it's a little bit more difficult, like one of those easier said than done sort of things. But I have found that trying to think that way when I'm like, I'm not going to get around this emotion, let me just try to add that into my decision making has given me a little more space sometimes, depending on like what the situation is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I could definitely see that being beneficial. Although I was just thinking of like situations where you're following the instructions and it's like you do exactly what they tell you to do and it's not going the way that it's supposed to go. And those are the things that really frustrate me because I'm like, I'm doing what you're telling me to do. Why aren't you doing it? And then you want to like hit it or bump it or kick it or something like that, which might feel good in the moment, which might hurt your like foot or your hand, but or you can just kind of like yell at it, which is what I do, which isn't really gonna like hurt myself, but kind of relieve some of the the pressure, I guess, or the frustration in a way. It's not really affecting the project. It might slow me down a little bit. But I do kind of have to like realize that eventually I'm gonna have to like, okay, I got out my frustration. The problem's still a problem. I gotta figure out what's next. Or I just need to like take a breather and just walk away for a moment and then come back where I'm a little more clear-headed and not as worked up. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point because there are a lot of like complex or challenging problems that take a lot of effort to solve. And if you try to, it's tangentially related to like sort of burnout, but like if you try to just keep pushing through on the problem without paying attention to your emotional state, like I don't know how many times this happened for you, but like where I get so frustrated or angry or whatever else that I can't think straight and I'm still trying to push through, but because I can't think clearly, I'm not making any progress.
Right.
The number of times that I have, I'll just take programming for an example, that I have just been like, I'm just going to take a break and take a walk around the block.
Yeah.
And then figured out exactly what I need to be doing is way higher than the number of times that I was like, I'm just going to sit at this computer until I figure this damn thing out. Like, so depending on sort of like the type of problem or structure of problem, it can help to get sort of like a change of scenery or like slow down or like do something else temporarily, because it'll like when you're more calm you can think more clearly and more likely to have the right answer sort of tumble out, as opposed to when you're already frustrated and just keep pushing through, the chances that you actually figure the thing out are much lower because you're not making good guesses or like trying to solve the problem in smart ways anymore.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it just made me think of another thing that I realized, after I feel like you have to have a limit. It's like, okay, make a certain number of attempts, try different things you find on Google or YouTube or whatever. But at a certain point, it's like it's still frustrating. It's just only getting more increasingly frustrating. What I've learned over the years is just to realize like at a certain point, just ask for help, whatever that might be. I think I was a little more resistant to doing that in the past, maybe in my early 20s, because of like, oh, well, maybe because I'm feeling ashamed that I can't figure it out myself, or that I have too much pride. I should have figured this out already by myself. And I feel like, yeah, there's no shame in asking for help, even if it seems like something that should be simple and easily fixed. If I'm getting to the point where I'm so worked up and just like defeated and frustrated and angry or sad or whatever, then it's like, yeah, I'm just gonna like invite others, because it's like the more brains you have to help figure out the solution, like an escape room. It's like try to do an escape room by yourself. Good luck. I mean, I'm sure it's possible for some people who are really experienced with that, but it's like the more brains you add to the problem, the more like different perspectives you get, and the more likely it increases the odds of the problem getting solved when you add more brains to the equation, usually.
Yeah, and especially if, like we talked about earlier, you get an expert involved, right? Like when it's someone who has experience with the kind of problem you're dealing with, more often than not, that's going to be way more efficient than you just trying to hammer away at it. And I have experienced sort of the same thing you mentioned, where like I feel like I need to figure stuff out myself or do things from an independent perspective, but it's not wise from an efficiency perspective.
Yeah.
Like If it's a skill I want to build or something that I want to learn, then I get more mileage out of like
Yeah.
trying to sort of like work through things myself.
Mhm.
But I often have to stop myself when there's things that I don't want to learn or don't care about. Like when it comes to my car, like something that's relatively simple, like changing the oil.
Mhm.
There have been times where I'm like, I should really learn how to do this myself. Like I should figure it out. It's not that complicated. But then when I structure that into the larger scheme of like my goals and what I'm interested in and all that stuff, like I'm not interested in learning about cars that much. Like
Yeah.
I just don't have that much interest in it. So that's another thing to think about is like
Yeah.
some problems I have created for myself basically because I
Mhm.
refuse to get help or
Mhm.
pay for someone who knows how to do it to do it.
Mhm.
And in the long term, those have almost always been poor uses of time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another good point you bring up is like, factor in the time and the efficiency of it. It's like, yeah, you can spend like days or weeks trying to figure out a problem that an expert could have figured out in like a few hours, essentially. So it's like you want to factor that in, and depending on, it's like if you are wanting to gain the experience of trying to solve the problem, and then like this is a skill set, like if you are a plumber and you are a new plumber, and you should probably become more sufficient over time so you're working faster and more efficiently. But if that's like not your passion or not your career, then it's like you don't have to learn to become a plumber, because people spend years to become plumbers, essentially. So I think that's important to factor in. And that's something I've learned over time too, that it's like, yeah, there are so many things that I always used to feel like I needed to be an expert in everything. Like for my business with marketing, it's like, oh, I got to become a marketing expert on top of being a doctor, and I got to like figure out all these other things. And it's like, oh man, sometimes it's just easier and more effective to outsource, and it's like, and I don't even enjoy that part of it. So it's like, why am I like forcing myself to do this when I don't necessarily have to do it myself, essentially.
Yeah, and you can never scale up that way, right? Like you can
Yeah.
never you're gonna hit limit if you're trying to learn everything and be a jack of all trades at everything.
Mhm.
You're not gonna be good at anything
Right.
specific, and also like I run into
Mhm.
it or like have heard of it with like people who own like a couple properties
Mhm.
and they're not like in construction or anything, but they want to fix everything themselves. And
Wow.
like just like a landlord that like comes in and
Yeah.
tries to fix your toilet or whatever, like
Right.
that sort of stereotype. And like you can never like, yeah, sure, he probably gets more skills around like, oh, like now I know a little more about plumbing. Now I know a little more about whatever else. But like there's
Yeah.
only if you're doing the maintenance yourself, there's only so many properties you can ever have, which is just an example of like, if you're spreading yourself so thin and not really focusing on anything, you hit limits where you have to start utilizing other people to
Yeah.
help you out. And the earlier you can sort of do that and identify the places where it's going to be useful, the faster you can get through a lot of problems.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you can move on to bigger problems or other problems, or play a bigger game of life, essentially, when you, like, the more efficient you become at getting through problems, whether you utilize help or not. It's really gonna be a valuable skill set, essentially.
Here's another topic that I kind of want to open up a little bit, but I feel like as I've gotten more confident and more adept at navigating problems,
Mhm.
my happiness has increased
Definitely.
because I feel way more comfortable navigating life in general. Like there's
Mhm.
far fewer times that I'm feeling overwhelmed and just like, oh, I'm not going to be able to figure this out or get this done. And far more times where it's like, oh, here's this novel thing. Um, Let me just figure out how to get it done and get it out of the way.
Mhm.
So, having that power for like both things that I want to take on and solve and figure out, and things that life just throws at me and I have to figure out,
Right.
having that skill set makes me feel more and more comfortable and spend less and less time just like, oh, I'm never gonna be able to figure this out. Like this is terrible.
Right. Yeah. I think I totally agree that being able to be effective at problem solving is going to increase your happiness, because it kind of gives you control over how your life is going to go, because everyone's going to encounter problems. It's just kind of part of life. And sometimes there are going to be problems that you were not anticipating at all. They're going to be just curveballs that throw off your routine or whatever it might be. And it's like your ability or capability to bounce back from that, or getting through that problem, whatever that might be, will help you feel like, powerful in the face of all the problems and issues that you have to deal with, versus like, if you're constantly encountering problems and you're just like, oh, just like life is just crappy all the time. It's like you tend to like play the victim of like, you're at the effect of life essentially. It's like, well, my life just sucks, and then you're not being proactive of like working through it so you can get to the positive outcome. Yeah, like at some point everyone's life sucks, and that's kind of part of life. And it's like, what do you do to move past that, to get to the other side? And that can be really rewarding and happiness invoking.
Yeah, because that's, in a generic sense, problems are probably the main thing that make people feel unhappy.
Yeah, probably.
And that's so generic that like, it's I don't know how much it means, but like, yeah, the more comfortable or the more capable you feel of dealing with those things, the less, or like the better relationship you will have with problems. I know that as my confidence has grown and as I've been able to solve things myself with help or without, but like, from my sort of actions solving problems, the less impactful that new problems are when they show up. So I spend less time with just like a negative relationship in terms of like fretting about it and freaking out about it and whatever else, and more time on just the practical pieces that get it out of the way so that I can move on to things that I want to focus more on.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, I think we covered this topic pretty well. Was there any final thoughts you had to share?
Nothing too much. Just, if you can figure out some strategies, because, every problem is different. There's so much variation, but like some high level things to start breaking that down into places you can take action, that's going to help. And most people, can solve some subset of problems. It's just other problems come up and then they don't have even those high level strategies. So if you can use sort of the things that work for you to solve other problems on problems that are more foreign, that can help you make some progress on them anyway, even if the path to solving them is much further than stuff you're familiar with.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, that's it for today. Thank you everyone for tuning in this week. We appreciate you, and if you appreciate us, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and help spread the happiness in the world. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and then go and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. If you check out in the description below, go to my website where you can get my free fast and easy guide to stress relief. Thanks again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.